Welcome back, everybody. Today we're beginning Perek Dalid. It's on page 156. You can see it in the corresponding English text. And as we mentioned, you could always find the previous classes, in this case, of Sharich and Vomona itself, this new segment which we fairly recently began. On the whole first segment, which is Likutei Amarim. But referring to these chapters in this which we're learning, you can see it on the Tanya online, wherever you're watching this, or the original website, tanyaonline.com, tanyaonline, one word.com. And the good thing is, as we mentioned, it also, when we begin a new chapter, to see the information of the previous chapter or chapters. This is namely the reason which we mention it, because instead of especially when we begin a new idea, instead of going back to the old, we could get straight into it, because it's truly a click away, or v'chlal, and generally to know the information where we're up to. Naturally, for the newcomers, those who have not yet following the class, you can see the previous messages or the messages of the previous chapter on this very website, tanyaonline.com. We do mention frequently that there's an advantage. It's important to learn. Wherever you're going to learn Tanya, as long as you're learning Tanya, this very, very important study, extremely vital, crucial, that every Yid, for that matter, learns Tanya, every part of Tanya. But wherever you're learning it, but the advantage of this site, the way it's built, that the text is on a separate scroll bar, that you can easily follow the class as such, and also you have access to all the previous classes which come up in the same fashion. We will continue Perek Dalid. So if you remember in the last class, right, you can see it again. It's a click away, but literally the last few words in Perek Gimel is you can see it wherever you're following. That why aren't they batal b'mitzias l'mekayim to their source? That's what Alter Rebbe leaves off with this question. And basically, the Alter Rebbe is saying, if the case is okay, so just let's have the quick backdrop. Hashem created the world with 10 sayings. Hashem spoke creation to being. The Alter Rebbe gives important perspective to that. What does it mean Hashem created the world with 10 sayings? What's that supposed to mean? So he explains that every one of these sayings carries a certain energy. Explained how the difference of Lashon HaKodesh, basically the idea of Lashon HaKodesh is so different and distinct from any other language. That in language is more of a Lashon Haskemi. It's something which is made up. They make up that for example, this is called table. There's nothing intrinsic with the table, with the word table at all. It's extrinsic, meaning to say there's no real connection. Yes, you say table, you don't think of anything else other than a table. That's what you're meant to. That's the point of the language. And everybody gets used to certain words which are connected with certain matters. However, when it comes to Lashon HaKodesh, there is indeed an intrinsic connection between the word and this which it's named, the item which has the name in Lashon HaKodesh. Eitz, Evan. As we were studying about the Evan, Alter Rebbe himself gives an example. Evan, one of the millions and billions of parts of creation, even within Elam Haza, this world, because it applies ultimately to every world. So we look at the stone, for example. Aleph has a certain energy, Beis, and then Nun, the exact order, configuration of these letters, the way they're set up, that has an exact a certain energy, which is precise. In other words, it extends itself and creates. We're going to mention in a moment, Alter Rebbe, I say this presently, but let's go back to the Asarim Hashem created with these 10 sayings all of creation. Our 10 sayings should have apparently just created 10 creations, 10 created beings, not this multitude of creations. And the answer, again, Alter Rebbe points out that, there's the Asarim Amaris, but you see in the Torah itself, you find different terminologies within the Asarim Amaris, within this 10 sayings that's in Bereshis. And more so, there's certain words that don't say in the Asar Maris, obviously, right? The significant majority of created beings are not, you don't find them clearly and explicitly in Asar Maris, but that's, the Alter Rebbe explains, these are they're created with the same word, with the same letters, the 22 letters of the Aleph Beis, which each one, again, has a certain amount of energy. And namely, there's the combination, and there's certain configurations, and the numeric value of certain words, which ultimately would produce a certain item, a certain created entity, and so on. Again, you can see it, you can look there. But that's what happened when Hashem created the world. But beyond that, this is the message of La'olam Hashem Dvarach V'nisam Hashamayim, that forever, meaning to say that the reason why something exists today is not because Hashem created only, it hung around the 6 days of creation. Is Hashem is creating it every moment, every second. And without Hashem pumping His creation into the energy into this created being, it wouldn't exist at all. Nothing. We return to nothingness. So what does that tell you? Again, very briefly, what we learned in Perek Gimel, that tells you ultimately that whatever the real chai is, what it really is, not 70% of what it is. We gave the example. A battery makes a device work as an example. Take out the battery, the device won't disappear. It will make it function, but it won't disappear because it has its own entity. Has its own strength, has its own makeup. The battery will make it function. Again, we gave an example. You don't water the plants. The plants won't disappear if you don't water it at a certain day that it's meant to be watered. It has its own energy. It has its own backing, so to say. It has its own makeup. The water will contribute to its development, to its growth. And so too in everything, even the body, right? After 120, the body doesn't disappear when the neshama leaves because it has its own makeup. Its original makeup, as the Alter Rebbe, I believe it says this in the further chapters as well. And then ultimately, in other words, the way the body came into being, and then it eats, and it's sustained by its mother, and then its own sustenance with the food and drink, the food that it eats and drink that it drinks, and therefore, because it has its somewhat independency, and therefore the neshama brings function. In other words, what's the neshama's function to the body? That it allows it to function and allows it to execute all its kaiches, all its faculties, and so on and so forth. And that does go away when the neshama ultimately parts the body. But the body doesn't disappear, which shows you again that it has somewhat of its dependent makeup, independent makeup, that is, as opposed to, this is again in stark contrast to everything Hashem created. It's not that the Dvar Hashem gives it a certain function or allows it to bring out its best and its best productivity, its best expression, and so on and so forth. It's not so. The mere fact that its mere existence is because of the Dvar Hashem, which is Mahava Machayim Mekayim. It's that energy which gives it life and the ability to exist. The Mahava, in other words, it brings it from a state of nothingness to a state of something every single moment. The phenomenon, the ex nihilo phenomenon, it's every single moment Hashem is pumping energy into creation in order that it exists. So you look at a stone, the stone is not there because it existed from the 6 days of creation. It's not even there because it existed 5 minutes ago. It's because Hashem is mechadish b'tovim every moment, not only every day, but every moment Hashem is pumping the energy into the stone. And if Hashem pulls back, the stone wouldn't just break or decay and so on. It would totally disappear. Again, you can see it in detail in the previous classes. And then it's a click away. And so the question Alter Rebbe left off, if that's the case, that's the only that would tell us it's the only energy of the stone, or the only existence of the stone is the Dvar Hashem, is this energy which is giving it life and existence. So why do I see the stone the way I see it? Why don't I see the Dvar Hashem? Why don't I see the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if that's the truth even of the stone? I say even because the stone is part of the inanimate part of creation. But even there, the whole reason why it exists is because Hashem is giving it life and existence. So it's only because of Dvar Hashem, and solely, again, not 70%, 80%, 100%. So that's really what it's all about. So why don't I see the Dvar Hashem? Why do I see the stone? And with this, the Alter Rebbe went into a whole mashal of the sun, right? The sun and the ray of the sun. Again, we're not going to go over that, but that's, again, a very, very big part of Perek Gimel. If you're a newcomer, it would make sense to appreciate the question via this metaphor that the Alter Rebbe gives, which only strengthens the question: why do we see the end of everything is bottled to the Dvar Hashem? Everything is really because the Hashem, Hashem is everywhere. You can't say that something comes to a stop and therefore we see creation the way it is. Again, the mundanity and the tangibility of creation, or the creation as the way we see it, because it's not so. Hashem is always here. Again, the mashal, that metaphor, that unique metaphor that Alter Rebbe brings in Perek Gimel, and his conclusion as such: why isn't everything bottled by mitzias to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So we begin Perek Dalet. I'll just say I made a bracha already. So Perek Dalet, ki hine ksiv ki shemesh u'magen Hashem Elokim. There's a pasuk which says the sun, as well, Alter Rebbe would explain it, that ki shemesh u'magen Hashem Elokim. Alter Rebbe touches this pasuk: the sun and the shield of the sun is Hashem and Elokim. Meaning to say like this. Okay, it has its literal translation, but the Alter Rebbe teaches ki shemesh u'magen, that the sun and the shield of the sun, that's similar to Hashem Elokim. Very different than the way it's originally the simple explanation of this pasuk. It says that Hashem Elokim is the shemesh u'magen, is the sun and the shield of the sun. So we know that there's, even in today, interesting, call it the ozone layer, but it is a predicate in Teda that the sun, which if it has a cover, like a kind of a purse, a nartek, the terminology is a nartek. The nartek is a purse, right? You have something, your wallet, and you put it into a purse. So the wallet is there, but the purse covers it up in order that it's for comfort, naturally, primarily. One carries a purse, but also that it shields, that it shouldn't be exposed to the outside for make it more difficult to be accessible. That's literally the translation of a nartik. But in this context, the sun has a cover, because if Hashem would take away that cover, the sun would simply be too bright. That's the simple meaning. There's the shemesh and the magen of the shemesh, the sun and the shield of the sun. It shields the brightness of the sun to come to its full expression, because that could be consequential. And the only reason why it's consequential, because there's no container. It'd be difficult for the inhabitants to contain this great and enormous brightness of the sun. So Hashem, with His great kindness, places a nartek, places a cover-up, a shield for that a shield for that sun, in order that the light of the sun should be able to be appreciated by all. Basically, that's the idea, shemesh. And again, the way the Alter Rebbe teaches, shemesh u'magen Hashem Elokim. Now, this is the shemesh u'magen. Now, the Alter Rebbe teaches Hashem Elokim. That the Alter Rebbe introduces, we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? Rather, again, Alter Rebbe is saying, shemesh u'magen, just like there's the sun and magen and the shield, so too is Hashem Elokim. We know Hashem has multiple names which He's called with, not because He just needs a few extra names, but every name, like everything else, but particularly when you talk about Hashem, the Almighty, obviously when Hashem is called a certain name, it's ultimately a certain expression, the way He expresses Himself. And if He's called Hashem, it's one way of expression, Elokim is another way of expression. We do know that Hashem is superior name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because when you say superior, it brings out more of the core emes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Elokim is an inferior name. We say inferior name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means it brings out more of an inferior expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's all names of HaKadosh Baruch But some of the names, when we say superior, because it's more transparent. It's a name which doesn't obscure. Like a name is usually, you could say a name doesn't covers up the person's essence one way or another. There's the person, and the person has a name, right? You call the person by his name. It's just a way of calling his attention. Or you say for something that certain people are called by name based on their profession. If it's a professor, for example, so the name, there's who he is because of his knowledge and because of his scholarship and the ability to transmit the scholarship and so on and so forth, and write about it and talk about it and convey it. He's called a professor. So that name, it's something which expresses a certain dimension of him. And if it's a blacksmith, and if it's a CEO, it's all names which express certain functions of the person. So obviously there's the deeper part, which is the person himself, not only this which he knows, not only this which the person knows, and not this what the person practices. There's the core of the person, which is naturally deeper to this which he does. But nonetheless, the name does bring out a lot of his function. We see a professor, a person who invests all his life in this, in these studies. So definitely, somewhat, it categorizes who he is as with this particular function or this particular occupation or investment. Sometimes, most of the times, it's a life investment and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, we all appreciate there's a core of the human being which is much deeper than anything that he would invest himself in. Even again, a lifetime investment, there's a deeper part, which is the person, the core, the essence of the person himself. So when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. From the perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's no name to call HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We can all appreciate a name as a function. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is deeper. He's not defined by his functions. He created those functions. But nonetheless, Hashem does express himself in different manners. So every one of those expressions has another name. For that matter, it says Hashem, there are the 7 names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, corresponding to the 7 characters, which we're familiar with. The reason why we're familiar with it, because again, all stems from its source, which is the way it's by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's the chesed, kindness, severity, and the tiferes, netzach, chayd, yisod, malchus, which we explained other times. The meaning of these characters, the meaning of these attributes, and each one corresponds to a name. It does say Keil is in Chesed, Elikim is in Gvura, but in the overall, you have many, what we were more familiar with, Hashem and Elokeinu. Okay, not to the exclusion of all the other names. Each one has a function. Each one it fits very much into what we're learning over here. But there is the overall, like the overall, we find we're very much familiar with the Hashem Elokim. And the reason simply is because all the midas within the 7 spheres, in the end of the day, they're all like the Alter Rebbe himself says it in the 3rd chapter of Lukuti Amarim, not Sharich Amar, Lukuti Amarim. If you recall, Alter Rebbe says when he speaks about the midas, he speaks about Chesed and Gvura. He says these are the primary midas. The Chesed and Gvura, it says even other places in Kabbalah, Chassidus, Chesed is really the primary midah, not only the primary midah, that's the main midah. It's a midah with ozilim kuliyim, and they all follow the Chesed. But generally, or a little more in detail, is the Chesed and Gvura, the right, the left, the severity, the kindness, or the kindness and severity, and all the other midas stem from these 2, basically. And here as well, this corresponds very much to Hashem and Elikim. Hashem is more the Chesed, and Elikim is more the Gvura. The severity, the symptom, the contraction, the cover-up, so to say, of Hashem. And similar to the Pasuk, Shemesh U'Magen Hashem Elikim. The sun and its shield, that's Hashem Elikim. So right away you see the sun is what is bright, what shines, what extends itself very brightly, while the Magen, which shield, will cover up that brightness, that it should not be, the sun shouldn't be that manifest, because not necessarily that would work, because the container ought to contain, in other words, the container, which is Elam Hazah, the Meir La Oretz La Dorim Aleh, the land, it's all the inhabitants in the land, they need to appreciate the sun, so there has to be that synchronicity, which is the sun and the shield. they're meant to synchronize, rather. Synchronicity. They're meant to synchronize the sun and the shield in order to bring the best benefit to the Oretz and Ladori Malel. Okay, so we can all appreciate. Now we see the similarity of the Shem and Umagin Hashem Elikim. That just like the way the Alter Rebbe teaches, there's the sun, the brightness, that would correspond to Shem Hashem. Because when this is synonymous, we say it's a superior name. What do you mean is a superior name? It's a name which it brings out more the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Ein Sof Nis, if you will, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Similar to the sun, it's just bright. That's Hashem. Obviously, there's Hashem which is beyond Gilu, beyond revelation, beyond brightness. Not to go there, but generally, we think about Hashem. We speak about Hashem as the Ein Sof, the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That corresponds to Shem Hashem. So it's a name which brings out that Bli Gvul of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It does indeed describe the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it is a name, meaning to say that it doesn't obscure the Emes Hashem. It's Emes Hashem, right? Emes Hashem, because the true, very much of the Emes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is expressed by that Hashem, Hashem's name, or this name Hashem. That is what makes it a superior name. It doesn't cover up so much. It's more transparent. It brings out the truth, the emes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the Ein Sof, the infinite dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Shem itself, that's what makes it a superior name. It covers up less. It's much more transparent, and therefore the name itself is about the Gili, the revelation of the Ein Sof, the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, while the Elikim is the Mogin, it's the shield. If you take note from all the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which one has a name which the literal translation, the configuration of the name is about plurality? That's right, it's Shem Elikim, Elikim, plurality in Hashem Echad, the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To give Hashem has a name associated with plurality, that's astonishing if you think about it. We're not talking about the plurality of Elam Haza. We're talking about Hashem as a name, which is Elikim, that Hashem Echad, that oneness of that one Hashem. That itself demonstrates so clearly and so evidently that this is a name which is only a shield which covers up of that Emes Hashem. And for that matter, it says that's the reason why we have plurality, divisiveness in this world, starting from, for that matter, very subtly, just things that could exist, for that matter, if you think about it. Nothing could exist in the face of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even in Elam Abriya, which is the place of Gan Eden Ha'elyon. Gan, Eden, Neshamis, Yeshvin, Neni, Miziv, Ashchina. What's this all about? You're talking about Hashem Echad. Infinity doesn't have all these terminologies. A garden, Eden, Neshamis, sitting, appreciating the ray of the Shechina. Right away you see also the ray of the Shechina. It's not the Hashem himself. And this is associated with the shield which obscures the emes of HaKadosh, the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why there could be, even in Elam Abriya, even though the Elam Abriya is a very holy world, which is very, the Achdus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is obviously very demonstrable in Elam Abriya. What are they sitting? It's all about Elokus, it's about godliness. But even the subtle definitions also have to come from somewhere. Would never be able to stem from a energy of achdus, of oneness, of infinity. This doesn't exist in the face of infinity. So this is part of what Hashem did. He established one part of himself, which is the Elikim, the Gvura, ultimately the Malchus, as we will learn, how this is synonymous one to the other, in order, and he created, so to say, within himself a name which somewhat presents plurality in order to create plurality. For whatever reason, why did he allow this to happen? Why did he put on the shield? Just let the infinite light shine and everything be consumed into the infinite and wonderful. It would be wonderful, but remember we spoke about it so many times. Why did he do it in the beginning? Why did he create a world? Which again, why did he establish all this? Because he wanted a we got to tell it to ourselves all the time, because the more we delve deeper into the backdrop of things or the pneumius of things, sometimes we stop and say, let it all be consumed into the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Or why do they generally have to create this magin, this shield, this elikim, to create bri, the yitzira? We mentioned yitzira, that's where the Gan Eden Natachtin is, and then Elam Asiyah, and spiritual Elam Asiyah, and then Elam Asiyah, Elam Gashmi, which plurality, divisiveness is default here. And go find Hashem. It's because, and obviously this, in the context of what we're learning, this all came because HaKadosh Baruch Hu established one of his names to be the Elikim, which is about plurality. So different than the spirit of Hashem Echad, the one is the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the Mogain, the shield. It shields over the emes of the Shemesh. Why did he create all this? Because he wanted a dira b'tachtein, he wanted a dwelling place in an inferior world, as we spoke about this much. In L'Kutei Amorim, Lamed Perek, Lamed Gimel is one of the starting points, and then namely Lamed Vav, Lamed Zayin, Lamed Ches. This is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted, a place which on the surface is it's a tachtein, and we open the lights. In other words, we reveal the emes Hashem le'olam, to a world olam l'shnei behester, which conceals over the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu via this Shem Elikim, via this Magen, and we are meant to reveal. And that's where the Eibishter has the nachas. That's where the Eibishter created everything. He created it all just because he wanted nis'ava. He had this taiva, he has this covet that we should take a world which is tachtin and transform it into a world which demonstrates elukus, vayash, and eventually this will come to full fruition when Mashiach comes. U'malah ha'oretz de'es Hashem, not the areas of kedusha or elam abri, etc. But u'malah ha'oretz is a very physical world, will be full with the knowledge of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Full, like the ocean covers, like the water covers the seabed. In other words, full. We would see elukus ayin b'ayin yiru, as the pasuk says. And the basar would feel elukus, the same psukim in Yeshaya. And as we say, Vayashem lemelech al kol ha'oretz, the oretz will be full. And again, this is the whole idea of why Hashem created Eilam Hazav. The Eibishter wanted a dir b'tachtenim, a dwelling place in this very physical world. Again, this is an expression of Medrash Tanchuma Parshas Nosai, which, again, in a few words, encapsulates the whole reason why Hashem did this. But if you look at what it is, you see the starting point of plurality is not in Elam Hazeh. It begins in one of Hashem's names, one of Hashem's expressions. Because ultimately he wanted this should ultimately evolve into a world of plurality, which, again, we have it in the most stark presentation of plurality we have in Elam Hazeh, contrary to the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it begins all the way back, Shemesh, Magin, Hashem Elikim. That there's the Shemesh, the sun, and the Magin. That's the Hashem Elikim. Hashem is about the transparent. It's a name which is transparent. Means to say it's Megala. It's something which defines, describes, and personifies the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, while Elikim is the Magin, the shield, which covers up. It shouldn't be so bright. And therefore, as such, the light which comes thereafter is modified. So the Rebbe continues, Magi Pirush Magin, Unatik L'Shemesh, the Magin, the shield is a cover-up for the sun, L'Hagin, to shield, literally, Sheyuchlu Habris L'Savar, in order the creation to be able to comprehend, to be able to tolerate the light of the sun. As our sages tell us, blessed memory, L'Os, Love HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Mitzacham Minateka, that Mashiach will come, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will emerge, will bring out the sun from its cover-up. What's going to be the consequence to that? So the Gemara says, the wicked will be judged with it. And then the Gemara says that tzaddikim will appreciate it. How does that happen? As we mentioned, if the container is strong, right? If you have, for example, you're made out of very thin paper and you have a bit of a fire, it's a bit too hot, and the paper would ignite, or it's close to a heat, for example. You have fire and put a little bit of very thin paper around, the heat will extend itself and the Fire, the very thin paper will catch on fire and be consumed into the heat, into the fire, into the flame of the fire. When you have a strong, for example, piece of metal, and it's standing in proximity to the fire, it not necessarily maybe become a little warm. And let's say someone's trying to warm himself up to be around that metal as an example, it's a positive thing. Now the metal warms up. The metal is not going to catch on fire. It's not going to be consumed into the flame. To the contrary, because it's a solid, strong piece of metal, so therefore it'll warm up, and people around, for that matter, could benefit. They put their hands, their fingers, and so on and so forth. So it's the same fire. It's the same heat. But someone of less kayach, some less energy, as the example we just give, is consumed into the fire. And the same measurement, so to say, the same fire, if it's a stronger matter, in other words, if it's something which is stronger and could contain and tolerate the heat of the fire, to the contrary, it becomes a benefit. Just using a metaphor to understand what the Chacham are telling us, what the Gemara is telling us. That Hashem eventually will take out the sun of its covering. Wow, that'll be very hot, yes, and there will be a consequence, yes. Rishaim nidainin by the Shaim will be judged. The tzaddikim, though, will appreciate it because the tzaddikim are more firm. Their container is grander, stronger, physically, metaphorically, or figuratively. Any way you look at it, any way you'll translate it. The reason why tzaddikim from the same mighty sun will appreciate it because the tzaddikim have a stronger container. For obvious reasons. They are tzaddikim. They built up a strong container. So, any way you translate this Gemara, you see over here that Hashem, in Mashiach will come, Hashem will take out and this would definitely have important consequences to the Rasha in his way, to the tzaddik, to the righteous in his way. Because the sun there's the sun with the container is very different than the sun without its container. In other words, without its cover, without its shield. The shield covers up of the potency of the sun, of the shine of the sun, the brightness of the sun. So we see this evidently. The Rebbe says, it continues again in the explaining. Again, we did this orally, but the Rebbe continues over here in the text. So to Hashem Elokim, just like the cover up, this shields on the sun, as on the brightness of the sun, for the sun. So to the Shem Elikim, the name Elikim, shields to the name of Hashem. Shem Havai, what is the Shem Havai? Shem Havai, Pirush Shema B'Sakel. We say Yud Kei Vav Kei. What do you find? What word do we find in Yud Kei Vav Kei? Mehave. It creates. What creates in the end of the day? It's the Shem Havai which creates. Havaya is Meloshin Mehave. Hashem, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, Havaya, we find, you see, when you say Yud Kei Vav Kei, it's the Havaya. That Hashem is Mehaves HaKoil, He creates everything. Mi'ayin Liyesh, from a state of nothingness to a state of something. Again, explained in detail in the first few chapters, this phenomenon of Shema, of Mi'ayin Liyesh. Then you have the Yud, right? Yud Kei Vav Kei, Hey Vav Kei is Havaya. You have the Yud in the beginning. What does Yud stand for? Yud Mishameshes Ala Pu'ula. It is a letter which describes the present action. It's a demonstration of something which is constant. Like Rashi says, as Rashi explains on the pasuk which says that so Eve would do all the days, the pasuk doesn't say Osa Eve Kol Hayomim, because that, even though there could also be, especially when you say Kol Hayomim all the days, you have that connotation that he was doing it constantly, But nonetheless, asa, by definition, if you translate the word asa, is something he did in the past. So how do you make sure in Lashon HaKodesh, the way Rashi explains, that you want to take a similar word and say it's not something of the past, even though it could have that connotation that he's doing it always, but by definition, if you look at the word in this context, as an example, asa, it's something which says he did in the past. So how does the pasuk, how does Lashon HaKodesh demonstrate that something is not only of the past, but something which is present and constant? Rashi says that's the Yud. That's why the pasuk says, it's something, again, if you look at the pasuk, this is which he did all his days, all the days he did so. That's the Yud. So too, when you speak about the Yud of Shem Havayil, when you speak about the Yud of which comes before the Hey Vav K, because if you think about it, it's bringing matters into existence, that would be enough if the name would be Havaya. What is the Yud K Vav K? What is the Yud? The Yud tells us that it's not something that Havaya, like Asa Hashem, created in the past, but he's constantly creating. That's the Yud, based on the whole message of Aleph, Beis, and Gimel of Shayich and Memuno. It's constant. It's not something which happened in the past in the 6 days of creation, but it's right now, and in a second from now, or even in a millisecond from now, or maybe even beyond the millisecond. It's right now he's creating that every part of creation, Yasa. In this case, you have the Yud, rather the Yud of Shem Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. It's Havaya with a Yud before that. It's doing it all the time. The life and the energy, which comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu in every moment. B'chol habruim, in all of creation, from the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mouth and the spirit of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and creates the mi'ayin liyesh in a manner of ex nihilo b'chol rega, every single moment. It's not enough the fact that they were created in the 6 days of creation, that they should be able to exist today, like I explained you in the first few chapters. That's Shem Havaya. That's the koach of creation. And that's what ultimately creates. It's not the Shem Elikim what creates. The Shem Elikim becomes a mogen, a shield, meaning to say that this is something which covers up on the potency of that creating force, the force of creation, the enormous koach to bring something from a state of total nothingness to a state of something we could all appreciate. That's an enormous koach, which comes from an infinite God, which is limitless. Take something which is, or from a state of nothing to create something, may it be the stone, the tree, or all of the millions and billions and beyond that created beings, the entire creation, even this which is more familiar, so familiar to us, the sun, the moon, and so on. This is a koach of a lukus, a koach of infinite koach, to take a state of nothingness and bring it into a state of somethingness, if you will. This is the way it was before Hashem created the world. The himself was there. There's nothing else. Nothing. Again, we can never appreciate the notion of nothingness, as we mentioned many times, because we're part of it, as like something which is striking, like before Hashem created the world, there was no phenomenon of time. What, the clock wasn't ticking? No, the clock wasn't ticking. There was no phenomenon of time. Can we appreciate a situation with no time? We can't, because we're part of the phenomenon of time and place. We're part of creation. And so too, we can't understand the idea of nothingness physically also. We could say, well, nothingness, a desolate place. The closest we think about something of nothingness is an empty desert, deserted of anything, of any productivity. No, there's no desert, there's no nothing. When we say nothing, it means nothing. Before Hashem created the world, there was no space and there was no time, which is again, Mokim Zman, as Alter Rebbe says, that's the mere layout of creation, the mere core of creation. That didn't exist. So to bring it into existence, you need a koyach ein seifi. It's the infinite koyach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is totally limitless, can create a state from ayin to yesh, from nothingness to something. That's an enormous koyach. That's associated with the Shem Havaya. That's part of that's expression of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The only thing is, when you have an infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is creating, so then perhaps you cannot see the Olam, you wouldn't be able to see the Olam, the world, the way it is, the way we see it, because if it's only an expression, an extension of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even that becomes the creator, and that's the energy which ultimately is Mahava Machayim Mikayim, brings creation into being, gives it life, like we said, and that's the koyach of the stone. So where's the physicality of the stone? How do we see the stone the way we see the stone? And again, pretty much back to the same question from this perspective of Avaya, that would be so overwhelming, because that's an expression of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How does the finite able to tune into infinity? Or to break it down, when you look at the stone, how does the stone look like the stone? A very finite, material, mundane stone. Very palpable, very, very, very stony, right? You don't see Dvar Hashem. There's nothing, you don't see the spirituality of it. That's where the Shem Elokim comes in and covers up that Shem Havaya, that what would ultimately come through would be, yes, the Shem, the creation in all its intensity and in its entirety. And yes, the stone which is created constantly by the Dvar Hashem, which comes from Shem Havaya, which is the creator, and the Yud, which constantly creates. But the reason why you see the stone is because there's the mugging, the shield, which is Shem Elokim, which covers up over the intensity of Shem Havaya in order for us to see the stone the way we see the stone. Now tell me, my friends, do you believe for a moment that because of Shem Elokim, the stone has its independability? That, yeah, we just covered you out, we just blacked you out, and you're not really part of the existence? That's nonsense, understandably, right? So you see a certain force, you ignore it, you block it out, so they don't have part of the play and part of the development, part of the pies, if you will. You black out a lot of things over here. And so Elokim does to the Shem Havaya, that we see creation the way we see creation, but that is not saying at all that you can just ignore the Shem Havaya. And at the end of the day, the result, again, just to get into the spirit, we'll look forward continuing next week, to get into the spirit, what is the answer? Why don't we see the Shem? Why don't we see the Elokus, which is Mahava Machayim Mekayim, which brings existence and life to creation, to the stone? The answer is not because the stone is something which could ignore the truth of Shem, of the Elokus. No, it's Hashem's name. It's Elokim. It's part of Hashem, which ultimately establishes that cover up in order for us to see it. And again, let's have the backdrop why HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed things to be so, in order for us to come into the picture and to be Megala ve'emes Hashem la'olam. That's part of the plan, the master plan of Hashem having a dir b'tachtenim, a dwelling place in this very physical world, which tachtein would never come about if you only experience the Shem Havaya. There would never be a phenomenon of tachtein for us to come into Elam Hazeh tachtein. There wouldn't be an Elam Hazeh. There would be a tachtein in order for us to reveal Elokus, because everything would be part of the Elokus reality. Everything. And to the contrary, wouldn't even be able to exist from perspective of Shem Havaya, because everything would be consumed into the infinite energy of the Shem Havaya. Because it's the creating force, you wouldn't see creation, you would only see creating force. And the reason why you see creation is just because HaKadosh Baruch Hu established this mugging, this shield, which is one of his own names. No one came into the picture, Chas v'Shalom, and just covered up and say, oh, this is too bright, let's find creation. Let's find the details in creation. Let's find the stone. So let's just cover up, just cover up, obscure, eclipse that energy from the Shem Havaya in order to see the stone the way it is. It's Hashem Himself. It's a part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's Chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the extension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and there's Gvura, which is literally translates severity, which is the idea of contraction, the idea of the cover-up. That's the Mugin, that's the Shem Elikim, but it's a Shem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And because it's a name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in essence, the reason why we see something is just because HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided that we're going to see it that way. Not because Olam Chas v'Shalom has that essential appearance, or the Olam Haza could be seen for any other reason in the fashion that we say Olam Haza. To ignore, to eclipse the brightness of Elokus. No, it's a Shem Elikim, it's part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is ultimately putting Himself in via Shem Havaya and ultimately expressing that Shem Havaya via the Shem Elikim in order that the Elam should look the way it looks and function the way it functions, again, based on the broader picture that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants a Dira B'Tachtenim, a dwelling place in a Tachten, in Elam Haza, which naturally could not come about without that Shem Elikim, but it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we're going to leave off with just two little examples. One example, there's a difference of someone takes somebody, opens a door, puts him in, locks the door, locks the person up. You can imagine the frustration of the person who's just locked up. We know it as prison, incarceration, and so on. Same room, the same exact room. You have an exam that you have to in a day or two, and you need complete concentration, 100% concentration. And you take all the material, you go into the room, you lock yourself up in the room for a day even. Is there any frustration? Is there any complication in that? Not at all. You were just in the same room the day before, and it's the same room, it's the same door, it's the same lock, and everything is the same. So why there it was all about anxiety, frustration, and the yell and the scream and the discomfort, demonstration of the discomfort and so on, losing it because someone else put you into the room and someone else locked the door. The next day, or the different state, a different scenario, that you go in yourself, you lock the door yourself. The door, the room, the confinement of the room is not a true confinement. Is because this is what you wanted, and this is what you established. You needed that seclusion in order to go through the material for which you're going to be tested the subsequent day. And that's the very difference over here. It's not a hell and v'hester. It's not something which is chas v'shalom covering up over this emes coming out of the domain of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, chas v'shalom. It's all part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's the Shem Havaya and there's the Shem Elikim. And once we realize that, we understand everything different, that we do ponder on the emes, and we do try to take away all the layers, because this is part of our mandate, and for that matter, that's part of the Dir B'Tachtenim plan. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is establishing a dwelling place for Himself down here in Elam Hazeh. And again, that's where the Perek Lamed Gimel in Likutei Amorim, which again, it's a click away on this very website for that matter, or wherever you're going to learn it. This is part of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu was saying, that at the end of the day, this is real. It's the reason why it was created in that way, is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu took His own mugging, the Shem Elikim, and put it together. But what do we say? Hashem Hu Elikim, or put it over the Shem Havaya, and therefore it creates that scenario. You see some of the realness of Elam Haza, and you have to introduce the Shem Emes Hashem Leilam, but you can introduce the Shem Emes Hashem Leilam for this simple reason, because Hashem Hu Elikim, it's the same God, and it's part of that same master plan. And this is, for that matter, the master plan, that we introduce the Emes Hashem Leilam, because the Emes Hashem Hu Elikim. And one final point before Be'ez Hashem, we look forward to continuing. And this, we mentioned in the past as well. But very briefly, you have the generator which will provide electricity, for example, for the town, for the city. That's too strong, so it stands usually behind the town. We even in today development, big cities, we could always define certain generators The generator stands outside because it's too close. It's too strong. It's too potent. It's covered up. It's barbed wire because there's so much energy there. What is it meant? At the end of the day, it's meant for the toaster to produce the toast, as an example. You can't plug the toaster into the generator, it will explode, it's too strong. So there's the contraction, again, the same ones who developed this generator, they establish a certain system which would contract the potent energy of the generator and ultimately wire it through the city and eventually the home, and then you have the outlet, right? The outlet is in order to put the plug in the outlet with any device, and the device should be able to work. So the reason why the device is working is because of the generator, not because of the outlet, understandably. The outlet is just, again, the same people who established the generator, and in order to generate energy to the city, in order for to ultimately towards the comfort of the inhabitants of the city, the town, they established and they understood that it's a bit too strong, so they contracted, took certain steps in order to contract the energy of the generator, and ultimately it would end up a minimal energy which is going through the wall, which would end up being the outlet. And in order for you to put the device into the outlet, in order the device should work. So someone's going to say, who needs a generator? The outlet is fine, generator's too strong. If I put the toaster into the generator, it'll explode. So I don't need the generator, I'm just good with the outlet. That's nonsense, because the energy is only coming from the generator. The reason why you have that device working is just because of the generator, not because of the outlet. The outlet is just a means in order that the energy of the generator should do good for you, to serve you, to allow that device to function. And similarly, the creation does not come from Shem Elikim, it comes from Shem Havaya. Elikim is just in order that ultimately there should be created an Elam Haza and every part of Elam Haza the way it is. But we know Hashem Hu Elikim. So we are meant to look deeper into matters, to find the Shem Havaya, to be Megala Shem Havaya, the Emes Hashem Leilam. That's part of our mandate. That's part of the Nisava Kodesh Baruch Hu Lisla Dira B'Tachteinim. That's part of our mandate in making a Kodesh Baruch Hu a Dira, dwelling place, B'Tachteinim, something on the onset is created via the Shem Elikim, which creates the phenomenon of Tachtein, in order for us to introduce the Emes Hashem Leilam. We look forward continuing accordingly. Have a good night.